welcome to Roadmap, Autotrader UK's product and tech podcast. Today we are welcoming back David Cox, Equal Experts expert podcast guest. I think that's what I've now labelled you as. I know a few people from Equal Experts, but I think you're the only person that's been here twice, and obviously a long time friend of Autotrader. So welcome back, David.
Yeah, nice to see you.
When we last caught up, we talked a lot about low-hanging fruit, not low-hanging feet, that'd be a bit weird. So low-hanging fruit, the fallacy of marginal gains. I think we talked about United a little bit, and we had to apologise for that. And then we looked at those sleeping giants. And I know you've been doing a lot more work in this area. So I wanted to hand over to you of where you're sort of up to your thinking and like deep dive back onto this low-hanging fruit, because I found it fascinating and started to see some ticks, would you say, of things I've done in the past that I didn't really think about until you left, and then went, I can see that pattern in myself.
Well, look, I'm not here to make you feel bad, but I think it's probably worth just revisiting what we mean by low-hanging fruit, so we're on the same page, right?
Yeah.
So low-hanging fruit, in my mind, is synonymous with the quick win, right? The easiest, quickest thing to do that delivers the most impact, as according to that impact effort matrix that everyone uses to prioritize their work. Let me tell you a story. So just recently I was working with a university in Texas, America, right? Liberal institution in a very Republican state.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've been following the news recently, but the Trump administration has been cracking down on the university sector by withholding federal funds from institutions in exchange for concessions with regards to who and how they hire into faculty, who and how they hire into their student body, and indeed what they teach, trying to get rid of things like critical race theory. Right? Yeah. So it's basically holding the universities to ransom by withholding funds. Now, universities in America aren't funded in the same way as in the UK. They rely on their own endowments, they're called. So a war chest of money, which is raised from corporates, but mostly from alumni, so people who've graduated.
Yeah.
Right? A little bit of background. About 9,000 students at this institution in Texas, about 800 faculty, 2,200 or so admin and support staff, and that's who I was working with. Their pot of endowments was shrinking. That was the sleeping giant within their organization. Right? And without that money, without that padding, they would have to concede to the Trump administration in exchange for federal funds, which means they would lose their sovereignty over who they hired, what they taught, and who they taught that to. Yeah. Right? So it was existential for them, because if they lost it, they would never get it back.
Yeah.
Right? Those teams were full of very talented people, and they were working really hard to the point where they were so busy, you felt sorry for them, but they were all working on the wrong things. They got obsessed with how quickly tickets were going from the left-hand side of the board to the right-hand side of the board.
Yeah.
Right? And that's all they thought about. That's all they talked about.
Yeah. And is this the bit, because I know we were just chatting before we sat down, is this where they've got like a target of number of tickets through, whether in a week or iteration, whatever, and then they just become obsessed with the number of tickets going across, not even what is in the tickets?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there was this one ticket around what they did when faculty retired, right? Which is they planted a tree. It came with a little plaque with something nice written on it.
Yeah.
Then there was a planting ceremony, and they hated it because it was complicated and took forever. You had to find out what kind of tree they wanted planted, what's on the plaque, get it engraved, who do you want to invite, blah, 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 arrange all that. They hated it to the point where they wanted to kill it. But it was the one idea that was raising funds in significant amounts for their endowments, because you invite alumni who may not have been back onto campus for 10 or 20 years.
Who might have had a great relationship with their...
They love their professor, so they're misty-eyed. They haven't been back on campus for that amount of time. They're remembering chugging kegs in the quad. And that is the time where you tap them on the shoulder and go, would you like to give us some money?
So that is, I can see... When you started saying that, they hate it, I was like, I can imagine they hate it. But I can also see with the misty eyes, that is an absolute, gold mine, potentially.
Gold mine. This is an existential threat to this institution.
Yeah.
Without money, they will fail.
Yeah.
And they're wanting to kill the one idea that was reliably making them money and protecting them in favour of these small, useless tickets that they were trying to speed across a board. That is low-hanging fruit.
Yeah. That is an interesting analogy. well, an example. I don't think we're going anywhere near like the US and universities. So why do you think then, if we're going to continue with this organisation, why do you believe the individuals were hooked on that particular, like the tickets going across and the volume of those small changes? Why couldn't they see that if there was such an existential threat and there was money coming in of this one thing, that wasn't the thing they should be sweating over? Like what was blinding them?
This is the great question. Why? Why are organizations addicted? Because I see it everywhere, right? I did my low-hanging fruit here. I did it at Product Tank. I did it at Manchester Tech Festival. I've spoken to hundreds of people. They all say the same thing. Public and private sector, that sort of resonates.
Yeah.
But I think it's got to do with dopamine. Essentially, we have become hooked behaviorally to the quick hit of dopamine from doing a thing.
Yeah. I can see that. I definitely get hooked on the feeling of achievement when something is ticked off the list or done. But I've not thought about it in the way of, but then it's just a feeling, and there's actually the thing that you're delivering has got no value. So you're just hooked on the feeling.
But it's implausible, Pete, to think that we swim in these waters every day and then we hook that up when we put up our coat in the morning and then come into work and then behave entirely rational. Like, it doesn't track. Like, in all walks of our lives, we are increasingly addicted to this dopamine hit, whatever it is, right? Our phone, whatever, gambling.
So, like, if we are hooked on it, say we are hooked on it, not saying we're not, but I mean, I definitely like to see that, like, feel like the need for progress and feel the great satisfaction of something being done. Isn't that a good thing?
Well, it depends on the thing.
Yeah.
Doing something which doesn't really advance you, progress you, or even gets measured afterwards in terms of value.
Yeah. You're
just staying busy. And I came across this concept, if I may, which was that there used to be 8 deadly sins. I didn't know this, right? One got kicked out in like the 15th century because
really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I know. It was new to me too. It was called acedia. It basically means the careless pursuit of the useless. And it manifests as both excessive busyness and excessive idleness. Right. So, classic example for us in the modern world, doom scrolling.
Yeah.
Right? Just filling dead time with dead activity. Yeah. Right? And it does sort of make us feel bad, but also it's kind of not our fault because the social media giants understand the cycle of addiction and have invested billions in optimizing that to keep us trapped. And so ascetic organizations are trapped in this kind of stimulus, activity, reward, deficit sort of cycle. And that's what explains, I think, the low-hanging fruit phenomenon.
So do you think, though, say, keeping really busy, just an example in my head, and because things do move at its pace, is there a bit where you think if you slow down and then we're picking the right things rather than going really fast and potentially picking a lot of the wrong things, but maybe stumbling on the right thing, would you not get to the same outcome in the end? So, like, where I was thinking in my head is, I feel like the speed cycle of change, just when you look at technology or whatever, look at the world, everything seems to be, when you look back over time, it feels like change is so much quicker than it's ever been. Whether that's for good or bad, I don't know. But is it the fact that because we're doing so much, it means that we stumble upon those things more often? Because that's the bit I was trying to work out in my head is, if you did 50 things, if you were hooked on those 50 things, and one of them actually was something great, or you slow right down and did only 10, could it be that you miss that, the golden opportunity? Or is it mean being more purposeful, you will find that golden opportunity?
Yeah, it's the latter. And don't confuse speed. It's about priority.
Yeah.
Like, good things take a while. So it's about prioritizing the best, most valuable ideas, regardless of timescale, regardless of risk, regardless of speed. And those are the things that we have to get right. Otherwise, you're burning out your teams and yourself.
And when you So when you've talked to organisations and individuals, is there like a telltale signs or a smell? Say you walked into that Texas university, like, is there things that you go, I've seen this before, or a feeling I've seen this before? Like, what would you say if I was like your sidekick and I was coming along and you say, right, I'm going to train you to see these things? I'm not saying it's like, I can't see them, but you know what I mean? Like going, I've now opened your eyes to it. You're going to go into organisation A. These are the things that if you walk through the door within day one, if you see these, there's a strong indication that the hook's on it. What would they be?
There are a number of them. One of them is unfinished work. So you have a field of half-dug holes.
Right.
So you get really enthusiastic about the latest thing. You dig half a hole. Oh, there's no gold here. We'll dig over there. Yeah. We'll dig another half-dug hole, and there's a field of it.
Right.
You see that immediately, almost. Yeah. Then you ask about priorities. Then you ask about busyness. Yeah. Everyone will go, I'm just so busy. But with the low levels of completion, there's no intrinsic reward in the work, which leads to people feeling hopeless. Morale is low, that whole thing.
So is that then? So if morale's high, so say you went in and there was a field of holes. It's not completely scattered, but there is some random holes there, a little bit more than you expect. But morale's high. Like what are they? Is the different, like, when you do the graphic equalizer on your stereo? Is the ones where you go in, actually, if these two things are like morale's high and there is a number of random holes, that's not too bad. Is there like a bit where you can say, but if you could dial down the number of random holes and retain that morale high, that's where you get into the sweet spot, because then there's another parameter you could then start to dial up.
Yeah, there's a concept in actually video game design called blissful productivity.
Right.
Where you feel, so that's when you're going to get the side quest in Zelda where you have to collect 16 chickens and you find yourself spending 3 hours on it. Like, what am I doing with my life? But like, it applies to work, blissful productivity. You understand that your efforts contribute to something larger than yourself. That is the sweet spot when it comes to morale and motivation.
Yeah.
So you can ladder up reliably your day-to-day effort to the overall mission of the organization that, by the way, you believe in.
Yeah.
That is when the magic happens.
Yeah.
But when you're just busy, when you're just that hamster on a wheel, doing things that are never completed, that are never measured, and therefore not valuable, there comes a point where you go, what is the point of all this?
Yeah. And when you've been chatting to people, so again, maybe the Texas University, when you started chatting to them, was there an epiphany moment where they go, oh my God, like, I didn't think about it like that, where then there's a realization? Or is it a bit like, I think I'm going through different emotional states in my head of thinking in past things I've worked on, going, oh, I definitely did that. Is the ones where it's head in the sand and they don't want to hear it, because again, like you say, you're hooked on that dopamine hit of getting that thing across the board.
Yeah, it's not like they just kind of like break down after 10 minutes, like tears of gratitude. Thank you, David, for moving the scales from my eyes. Because there's a difference between habit and addiction.
Yeah.
But habits are hard enough to shift, as we all know. But addiction is a whole other level of that, because there is a degree of deception and self-deception in it. So you will lie to yourself about the value you're adding. I'll give you an example. Do you use Duolingo? Are you learning another language?
I've dabbled with it. I'm terrible with languages.
Right, same here, right? But I was reading this blog by a guy here in Manchester talking about how he just completed his 670th day of his streak in Duolingo.
Right.
He was learning German. He said to his mate, like, boasted about this number. His mate said, bloody hell, you must be reading Nietzsche in the original language. Like, give us some. And he could barely order a table for two. And so what was happening there? He was on there every day. 670 days. Yeah. He could barely say, I have a dog in German. So what was it? And so he, as a good product person, he kind of took a step back, looked at some competitors. There's Buzu, I think Babbel is another. They could teach him German, but they were boring, right? They were like being in the classroom. It's like, forget that. Yeah. So he kind of analysed, how did you turn the very, 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 very slow acquisition of language into a money-spinning addiction? Because that's what it was. Yeah. And it broke down into some interesting things. There's leaderboards. They give you double points if you go on first thing in the morning and last thing at night, which is basically forming the habit. But then there's this other thing, which is the pure genius. It's called a streak freeze, where you pay to keep your streak. Because you'll lose your streak if you fail enough of the exercises and or you miss a day. So his number, 670, wasn't even real. Because he'd missed a bunch of days, he'd failed a bunch of exercises. He paid to maintain his streak. Now, that is the behaviour of an addict, because it's self-deceiving.
That is insane.
But we're all doing it, Pete.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, that one, this morning I sat upstairs and I was working through some stuff, and what made me feel really good is even though I'd already done it, I had some slots in my diary that were free just to do things. And then I went and put in the diary things I'd done, and it made me feel like, so it was 7:30 till 9, and it was just free time, and there was no meetings, but I was just getting through stuff, and then I blocked it like I'd done, because I had done these actions of things, and it made me feel really good, because I looked at my diary at that point, and it didn't feel like it was wasting time, because there was something in my diary, and I can see how, or the other week, I wrote a list down, and I was putting stuff on my list that I'd already done. So I put it on my list, and then I crossed it off and ticked it. I mean, I'd done it because I was writing the list about 10 a.m. for the day of things I'd need to do today, but I was putting on things I'd done already at like 8 o'clock in the morning. So is that the type of, not like great behaviour, because I don't want to then like completely unravel in front of yourself on a camera, but is that the type of stuff where you go, those are the things where you are hooked on the action?
Classic addicted behaviour.
Yeah.
You're addicted to the dopamine of ticking things off to the point where you're making your own list of things you've already done. It's wild.
Right, flip it back to you. So have you ever recognised where you start to go down that hole of getting on that hamster wheel of, I feel like I've been really productive today, and doing things that maybe that 30 seconds of writing 5 things that I'd already done, that was 30 seconds wasted?
No, 100%. I'm not immune to this, but I'm aware of it, which means that I can start to temper my behaviour.
Yeah.
Because I see a lot of my colleagues, both within clients and within my own company, going from meeting back to back. They never reflect on the conversation they just had. They never write up any notes. They never share those notes because they never get written. They just go on to the next thing. And they're doing that, let's say 7 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's no life. And there isn't much value in it, because a meeting that you have, which is good, that isn't reflected upon nor written up and shared, is a tree falling in the woods.
Interesting. So how do you then... You're not my personal psychologist here, by the way.
Are we in a therapy session now?
I've had a few.
Tell us about your relationship with your mother.
I've had a few of these recently. I was talking to a guy from Bupa, and we're talking about prostate cancer, and he started saying like, these are the risk like things, and I'm sat on my couch like age, weight, cyclist, all these things. I'm like, oh my Lord. So not going to go down that one. But then if then I was saying, right, so David, I feel like I'm wasting a bit of my time a day. Like I'm writing things I've already done to make myself feel a bit better because I've got loads on. What are the things where you can say, well, we'll talk individual and then we'll talk organisational. But what would you say, right, these are things to be watching out for. This is how you can break that cycle.
Yeah, so a friend of mine just got into a new role where now she's like the head of people across the whole organisation.
Yeah.
And I met her early and I just said, tell me, what are you going to do during your first 100 days? You know, a bit like a American administration or even here in the UK. Start talking. It was all low-grade stuff. Indeed, it was stuff that she'd just spoken about in the last conversation because she hadn't had the time to reflect on it. Said, tell me the one thing that you think is most valuable, regardless of difficulty or timescale or risk. And she thought about it, and then she came up with something really impressive. And I said to start there. And don't compromise on it. Stay focused on it. Don't let these other things drain your energy or distract you. If you're going to shift this far and fast, although far is more important than fast, by the way, stay focused on this one thing, the biggest challenge within your organisation.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it's like how you can paraphrase that into your own work. And how do you... So then say it's organisational level. say you go into an organization, so it's not a particular team or a particular individual, where the whole organization you feel is just running after the small marginal gains that really aren't going to make the difference, or are hooked on that dopamine kick, is how do you then at organizational level start to like pull it back?
There are three things, right? The first one is talk about value rather than velocity. So when I have conversations in organizations about value, like, why are you doing that? Why are all of you doing? Like, I see teams of 300 people, unbelievably busy, very talented, nothing getting done.
Yeah.
It's like that bit in Willy Wonka where they're pouring like 7 tons of sugar in the machine at this end and then a gobstopper comes out the other end. You're lucky to get the gobstopper. So the thing is that people get quite defensive, quite spiky, because there's some psychological safety stuff around this, because you're sort of calling their baby ugly. You're going, you're really busy, but where's the value?
Yeah.
So they start to get into the language of feature factory, burn up charts. They start to talk about velocity because speed is easy to measure. They go, we've accelerated. It used to take us 9 weeks to deploy something to live. Now it takes 2 weeks. Aren't we brilliant? And I cannot say this enough. I do not care about how long it takes. And any leader that goes to a team and says, I want you to do it quicker. I know you wouldn't do this, Pete, because you're a very intelligent and sensitive man.
I've definitely done this in the past. Definitely done it in the past.
It needs to be reflected on in organizations, because going quicker means nothing. And in fact, it's probably more harmful than good.
Yeah. I think it's the interesting one, like you say, is that the burn down or burn up chart or whatever. I remember, I mean, this is a long time ago, like must be 15 years. And I remember being like a particular project I was working on previous employer. Not going to say where, because when I look back at it, it wasn't greatest time. But there's a bit where me and the people on that team became obsessed with, like you say, how many points we'd achieved that week, how many points the team had achieved. And I think you started to lose sight of what we're actually achieving here, like really what we're achieving here. Great thing is we had a really good person on that account who I remember him asking that question, like, what, like, great, you've done 80 points, but what have we actually got to show? And I remember that was like, it was one of those questions where you go, what have we got to show? What we actually got to show? And then I came here, and I remember the first couple of weeks at AT, and it was like into those like constant showcases and questioning and stuff. Still using burn down charts, still using story point estimations and velocity, but very quickly, I think that was my first year at AT, we did move away from that relatively quickly, especially with transformation people coming in, because it was that, I think that question got asked again. Great, you've done 60 points, but on what?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is the last time when we were chatting about the low-hanging fruit and the sleeping giants, things like that. It was like, I think this time in my head, because I reflected a lot afterwards when we spoke, and I was like, right, I get where you're going from this one. So it is a bit more like, it's really, really tangible. But the bit that scares me is that bit of, I know I'm hooked on. I like the feeling of getting stuff done, of ticking things off a list. That's when my brain works. But like you say, is making sure that list is not 500 lines long with things that you've already done and things that are really important.
Also, the first step to addressing this is to admit you have a problem.
Yeah, I've got lots of problems.
It's like a 12-step program. But like, long story short, the best way to measure value, by the way, because people get like, well, if it's not speed, then what is it? It's return on investment. It's particularly in private sector, but it applies to public sector as well. If you spend £100 and you make 101 back, let's have that conversation. Yeah. If you spend 100 and make 99 back, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah. And do you find that, again, you're going into an organisation, is it that then do you start with individuals, or is it a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach? Like, as in, if you can get a number of individuals to say, think ever slightly differently, and like that 199, like think in that way, that just, which can be a slight, like even make me think about a list now, thinking about how I'll do that list differently. Is it that you start to influence those particular individuals, and then that is a ripple effect? Or do you find that, especially when it's an organisational problem, has it got to come from the top down?
No, I mean, different to level. But what I do is, I ask everyone the same questions,
Right.
whether they're the CEO or the junior dev.
Yeah.
You ask them all the same questions, which means that then you can read across those answers because they're individual interviews and pick out the themes, then drill down into the root causes, because the root causes are common, but it's, a bit like, all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. Yeah. But there are certain patterns, such as if you don't understand the strategy, then how do you know that what you're doing is contributing towards it? And then there are other things like, are you just being tasked with a bunch of to-do things, as opposed to being given outcomes and then figuring that out?
Yeah.
And those sort of things emerge. You talk about the root causes, and then you talk about, well, how can we reverse those?
Yeah.
What can we do to improve these things? Because otherwise, you might skip off the kind of surface if you come up at a kind of facile or superficial level. You have to keep drilling down and down and down and finding those often quite uncomfortable things about the organization that require talking about.
Yeah. And have you found people, I know we talked a little bit about this a minute ago, but like that resistance to change? So is it like again, you've been brought into an organization, you see that actually there is this culture of hooked on the number of tickets going across the board, not the value of what's being delivered, and it's hooked on the speed rather than the what is the impact you're making. Have you had then, again, like naysayers going, absolutely don't believe in that? You know what I mean? It is all about velocity. It is all about getting tickets across the board. That bit I was asking at the beginning, saying, well, sometimes is it better to just be going really fast at everything, or is it better to pull back and be really purposeful? Have you had resistance push back going, no, that's nonsense?
Yeah, all the time, which brings me to my second point, which is about taking bigger swings.
Yeah.
Because this does come from leadership. We need to do better jobs of prioritizing the work that we are saying we're going to do and that we commit to. And we need to understand why we're committing to it and making that transparent to everyone, including ourselves. Because the reason why advanced capitalism over-indexes in terms of short-termism and risk aversion is because leaders do not feel safe enough to take a big swing and miss. They feel often that the consequences of that are unsurvivable within their culture and organization. And again, we need to have that conversation. Yeah. Because people who are scared make smaller and smaller decisions because the blast radius of the impact of getting that wrong is survivable. Yeah. But if you're confident and you're clear-minded and you have the right people and processes, then you can take those bigger swings, because only big results will come from big swings.
Yeah. So, when you talk about, we've talked about the past is, fail, if you're going to fail, but fail fast and then recover. So is this the one where if you were taking a big swing and you did miss, but it was a calculated one and you knew what you're going for, and obviously there's always, even though you say fail fast, there's always some sort of ripple effect of failure, whether it be then it failed, so we're going to do something drastically different, or actually we're going to turn that problem upside down. So it isn't that you don't repeat exactly the same task and then fail again. So there is always, it doesn't mean there's consequences, it's more there'll be things you'll do differently. How do you then persuade people to take those bigger swings?
It's a posture thing, because you say the currency is learning. Yeah. Especially during the early stages. Yeah. So if this works out or not, we'll learn something from it. Yeah. So it can't be that our return on investment period is the next 3 weeks or something. Yeah. This has to wash its face immediately, because it drives its perverse incentives. It drives the wrong behaviors. Yeah. If we have the culture where we say we try things and we learn from them and then we move on and we go again, then you're golden.
Yeah. And have you been into organisations and seen that they have changed that tack from small iterative, like you say, low blast radius, like risk averse things, to going, do you know what, we are going to go for that big swing. And we might have missed the first big swing, but the second big swing we absolutely knock it out of the park. Have you seen that as like tangible examples? I know you can't go into the specifics, but have you seen it and they've gone from being mediocre to being great, or from failing to being successful?
Yeah. I have. So I was working with a major UK grocery retailer.
Okay. Right, okay.
They were replatforming their beers, wines and spirits platform. It was about 10 years old. It was end of life. They were worried about it falling over. But as we were replatforming, we're picking up each thing, each feature or whatever, and having a look at it, turn it through in the light. Do we want this? Does it come across as is? Do we change it? Do we kill it? What do we need to replace it with, or is there anything new? In those 10 years, Apple Pay had come along. And their culture was one of exhaustive upfront validation. So they were going to run like Apple Pay through 1% of the traffic on the website. Let's see who goes for it. Then we'll put it up to 2%, maybe in 4 weeks' time. And we'll have the data wonks crunch the numbers. And I was like, this is a no regrets decision.
Yeah.
We're leaving money on the table today by not just putting it in, because this is just a reality that occurred over the last 10 to 12 years, right?
Yeah.
But like, what are the potential negative ramifications of not just pulling the trigger? And they were mature enough to go, yeah, okay. Yeah. And so they were able to put it in, like, honestly, within like 48 hours, because it's so easy to plug into that API. And it was done. And they started making money. But they had to swim away from the shore that they derived comfort from.
And their deriving comfort from was like low impact, go with a very slim test, make sure it's absolutely the right thing, and then go, even though obviously when you look externally and take a step back, it's established technology that everybody else is doing.
Scared organizations defer their decisions to data. It's like, where's the data? Especially quantitative data. Give me more and more and more. And it's faffing. There are some no regrets decisions because you know things about your market. You know things about cars and car adverts. You don't need to, every time you make a decision, go back to first principles. What is a car? And what is an advert? And why? Like, there are things you know about your organization that you can just pull the trigger on.
This is where it does get very fascinating, this. It's more that it's the bit where I can sort of see the anti-patterns to it as well. When you describe, like, because it's sometimes it's like I wish sometimes I could have these conversations, say 5-10 years ago, and go, oh, like that bit, like, oh, that's that conversation I had on that stuff, because you do see where people are like, no, it's clear this is the decision making. You're like, and then that thing in your head going, well, should we test this first? Like, where's the data proving it? Like, are we sure? But then you say is like, that's one where you look at it and go, that is a big swing, and there's a lot of sort of around the size going, it is the right big swing to take as well. But then you get in that sort of I'm not going to say it's the book, but you go back to your book, don't you? Your little book that says, have I got the data? Have I done a low risk test on it? Have I which is like, from what we're talking about, is that might be your comfort blanket that you fall back on.
The grand anti-pattern here is the reverse.
Yeah.
Where you don't know very much about an idea and you just ram it through.
Yeah.
So I was reading the kind of tell-all memoir from the inside of Facebook, now Meta, called Careless People. And I was interested in it because of that acedia thing, the careless pursuit of the useless, right? So the careless word sort of got me. I'll give you an example. In 2015, Zuckerberg spoke to the UN, right? And interesting fact about Zuckerberg, he refuses to be briefed on anything longer than a tweet, basically. So if you handed him even a page of text, he'd go, I'm not reading that, thank you, let alone a dossier. So he walked up and addressed the General Assembly of the UN in New York and said, we are going to give free internet to every refugee camp on the planet. And he'd made it up on the spot. And everyone on Facebook is watching going, what? What did he just say? Is this even possible? Like, how does that work? Refugee camps are usually in quite remote areas. Like, so now we're going to get into the infrastructure of running fiber cables out to Darfur. Okay. So anyway, now they spend 18 months trying to figure this out. And their brutal head of strategy, a guy called Kaplan, says, this ain't going to work. We should charge refugees for the internet. Okay, pivot, another 2 years, massive amount of efforts, hundreds of thousands of hours. Then someone points out the refugees don't have any money, so they can't afford the internet, so they kill the idea. But in the meantime, the leader of that organization had said a thing and everyone jumped to it to the highest level of fidelity, and all it did was waste time and money.
It's bonkers, isn't it?
It happens all the time.
Yeah. So how much, I know, like, a joke before we we were joking beforehand, like going back into like Netflix documentary, undercover reporting by David Cox. So like with this, because we've talked twice about this, like, and we've gone deeper on the subject, is like, is this something you're actively, constantly working on, this sort of, pushing organisation or individuals to think about this differently? Is this something you've got, like, you're doing more around, or is it like something that you've fallen into love and interest on? Because it feels like there's lots. I mean, I could be picking your brain for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. So like, where does this go with you now? Is this something you're talking externally about? Is it something you consistently talk in organisations about?
Yes, but I also don't want to become a hammer looking for a nail.
Yeah.
Because I see it a lot amongst my colleagues and amongst my clients with regards to things like AI. I don't know what Autotrader are doing on AI, but it's obviously the latest game in town. Right?
Yeah.
And I say latest because I've seen these come and go. Once upon a time, it was big data, which meant spreadsheets. Then there was things like blockchain. Do you remember that? There was the metaverse for a while. These things come and go. And I can't figure out yet, and I don't think anyone has, whether Gen AI is going to fundamentally and lastingly change the life of a knowledge worker, or whether or not it sort of normalizes sooner or later, gets commoditized, and then becomes a thing, like a tool in our toolkit.
Yeah.
But like, I work a lot with public sector. The government, the Labour government, in their wisdom, has said that AI is going to turbocharge the economy,
I read
and
that,
B, it's going to save a bunch of money because they want to save 15% across the public sector. Now, the public sector in this country last tax year spent £1.23 trillion. So according to my GCSE maths, 15% of that is about 180 billion. Right? So how are you going to find that? Because it can't be just through laying off 15% of the civil service, because A, it still costs money because of redundancies and pension liabilities, but also you can't hollow out the civil service like that, because civil servants do a really good job in really difficult circumstances. You would kill the public sector by doing that. So AI apparently is going to find somewhere in the region of £180 billion worth of savings. But when I talk to the public sector, show me these ideas. It must be, because you're not going to get there incrementally, are you? You can't get to 180 billion with low-hanging fruit. This is the biggest swing I've ever heard, really. They're talking to me about deep-seek variants, analysing bundles of data. I'm like, no.
So is this where maybe, like, so the stuff we talked about today, is this how you frame when you're looking at stuff? Is this your frame where you go in and go, right, I'm looking at every time I'm going in to look at, like, this is my first thing I look at in terms of those. Is it marginal gains, hooked on just trying to get things across? Or is it clearly they have got a big swing and what's behind the big swing? Is that like your sort of frame of, not reference, but you know what I mean?
It's not sophisticated. I'm just asking, where's the value?
Yeah.
Because otherwise people will default to talking about the process. And then when you ask, well, how are you going to measure that?
That's where I've gone already, straight away.
Then it's velocity.
Yeah.
And then it's volume. So the volume and velocity of tickets moving left and right across the board is how most organizations, especially tech organizations, measure their value. So that's all I'm asking. Where's the value?
Yeah.
I'm not closed-minded to it, and I want to help.
Yeah.
But that's the first way and best way to unlock the conversation.
Yeah. Well, that's been brilliant again. I know we'll probably do some sort of follow-up in the near future. So big thanks again for swinging by. I know you're super busy, but it's fascinating digging into sort of your insights and your thoughts and things. Even when it does then, I go, oh my God, I need to stop writing these lists with things that I've already done on them. So that's going to be my big learning for today. No doubt we'll get you back. I know we're probably going to be hooking up later in the year anyway, just to chat, which would be great. So for the listeners and viewers, thanks again for tuning in. And hopefully, if you found this fascinating, you can reach out to David directly. I'm sure he's definitely on LinkedIn, and I know he does talks externally. So please like and subscribe on YouTube and keep your teeth in. And remember to hit the notification button so you never miss an episode. Follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And that's us done. So I'll see you soon for an episode. Cheers again, David.
Thanks, Pete.